everyone, it's Stephanie and welcome back to my channel. So I am back today with a book review. I don't know if this will be a regular thing or just if I'm still kind of in my pop-up era or what, but I recently read a book that just hit me so hard and I read it at just the right time that I was like, I have to talk about it. And that book is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This is translated from the Italian by Anne Goldstein, and this is book 1 in the Neapolitan Quartet. So this follows Elena and Leela throughout, I think, 60 years of their lives. And so this first book is mainly childhood through most of the teenage years. So we really get to know these characters, and I just loved it so much. Elena Ferrante is a pen name, and nobody knows the identity of Elena Ferrante except I think her publisher. And honestly, like, I get it. She can just write in peace and put her work out into the world and not have a social media presence. What a time to be alive. But as you can tell, I really love this book. I tabbed it so much. The thing that really struck me was just how raw and honest and rich this book is. The writing is just lovely, and it's told from the perspective of Elena, and it very much feels like, come and sit down and let me tell you my life story. Nothing is overly flowery. A lot of it is just like, this is how it is. But the writing was just so lovely and compelling. And I feel like she did a really good job of balancing showing and telling. And even though there are some really hard things in this book, some of it is hinted at or alluded to, and then some of it's so-and-so did this to this person, but we don't get a graphic description of it, which I did appreciate. It's like your imagination can do the rest of it. So it can be a hard read at times, but it isn't incredibly graphic, which I did appreciate. We mainly follow Elena and Leela, and they become friends, and they grow up in 1950s post-World War II Naples, and they grow up in a poor but vibrant village, and it's definitely filled with such dynamic characters. And I did have trouble at times remembering who was who for some of the more minor characters, but as the book went on, it got a lot easier, especially when we started having more plot threads with the same repeat players. But what really struck me in this was the exploration of female friendship and how accurate this was, and even just friendships in general, but specifically female friendships. Right off the bat, we get the feeling of admiration that Elena has for Leela, and she just thinks she's the most brilliant friend, and Elena has to struggle a little bit to get good grades in school, and for Leela, even when she has to study on her own, it seems like things come so effortlessly to her, and she teaches herself like math and Greek and Latin. And while Elena does do well in these things, she's one of those that has to study for it and work for it. And so there's always a sense of trying to be better than the other one or prove that you are that brilliant friend to the other friend. And it's just really interesting to see how it ebbs and flows between both characters throughout the book. And then especially, so it says, Maybe I should erase Leela from myself like a drawing from the blackboard, I thought, for, I think, the first time. I felt fragile, exposed. I couldn't spend my time following her or discovering that she was following me. Either way, feeling diminished. And as I watched, I understood conclusively that soon she would lose completely her air of child-old woman, the way a well-known musical theme is lost when it's adapted too fancifully. I think that's just so accurate. When you have a really good friend and sometimes you feel behind them and sometimes your victories puts you ahead of them, but you're always constantly just ebbing and flowing. And I also really loved, through their friendship, the exploration of innocence and then loss of innocence as you get older. And we see things happen to characters and just your world gets shattered, and just how steadfast their friendship stayed through this. Even when there was times where they didn't really talk, it was still my friend. And I love that this is called My Brilliant Friend, and for most of the book, you think it's Elena talking about Leela, and then there's one section where Leela calls Elena my brilliant friend, and I thought that was so beautiful because best friends always do that. Like, when I think of my best friend, I'm like, he is brilliant. He's one of the smartest people I know, one of the most talented artists I've ever known. Such an amazing human being. And on the flip side, I know that I'm his brilliant friend. I'm smart and a good friend and loyal. And I love that we see the other character through their eyes. So it's one of those, like, I wish you could see yourself the way I see you. I get that we get both perspectives for that. It's just lovely. I think it's hard to reading this at times because they are growing up in such turbulent times, and they're still in the old world traditional mentality of their parents, and they're trying to break free of that. And that really struck me early. So it says, our world was like that, full of words that killed: croup, tetanus, typhus, gas, war, lathe, rubble, work, bombardment, bomb, tuberculosis, infection. With these words and these years, I bring back the many fears that accompanied me all my life. And then later on, it says, now her job was to put order into a chaotic mass of impressions. So she gave concrete motives, ordinary faces to the air of abstract apprehension that as children we had breathed in the neighborhood. Fascism, Nazism, the war, the Allies, the monarchy, the republic. She turned them into streets, houses, faces. In her eyes, stained to the marrow by shadowy crimes, all hardened criminals or acquiescent accomplices, all bought for practically nothing. She and Pascal enclosed me in a terrible world that left no escape. But it just struck me that, like, anytime we have something major happen, our brain always tries to put things into patterns or organizes, like, the chaos into calm and just tries to make sense of the world around you. And I thought this was so relatable considering the world we're living in right now. I know some things have changed, but at the same time, we're repeating history. So the enduring power of literature. But I just love how we get to experience all this through starting with childhood and then through their teenage years. And also the feeling of being behind, like feeling behind your friend, or the world is chaos. I don't feel like I'm where I should be. And it's just such a good exploration of that. I also thought the family dynamics were really, really interesting. The men in this book are very like stereotypical early part of the century men. Like, we go to work, women stay home, they're in the kitchen. There's a lot of violence and yelling and screaming, and even at the beginning of the book, something major happens and they're just watching it. And yes, it's traumatizing, but also it's just another day in the neighborhood. My brain, that was so hard to read, but also, again, so relatable to these things now. Like, when you see something enough, you become a little bit desensitized. So it's like, well, this happened last week, but it's not as shocking because the same thing also happened the week before, or what have you. I think on one hand, the family dynamics were so strong because you could see the love from some of the family members. Like, they may not be the ideal father or mother figure, but their motives would be, I just want the best for you, or this is how it's always been, this is how my parents raised me, so I'm going to raise you this way because I want you to have a better life. And some family figures are just awful people, and again, relatable. Everybody still has a family member or two that they're just like, they're not a good person. I just think it's really interesting to see how the families support each other, but also in the midst of violence, or just it just feels like a vicious cycle at times. Like, there's one scene and it says, father and son first had to explode until they wore themselves out, and then they went back to working together, mute, shut up in the shop with their desperations. So on the flip side, it's like, we're gonna fight and we're gonna get it out, and then we'll get back to work because that's what we have to do to make it through the day. And it's just a really interesting exploration. So another thing that really struck me was how complicated the men are in this book, or why men are complicated in this book. So growing up, Elena and Leela, I think, got violence or like yelling, screaming, things like that from their mothers and their fathers. And then as they get older and start going into their teenage years, the violence from the men turned into something different. And we see some of the male characters just not fight it at all. This is how men are. This is how I was raised. This is how I'm going to be. But then we see other male characters really try to fight it. And then some of them just can't escape that generational cycle of just violence and not treating other people like human beings. And it's just really an interesting exploration, and also an interesting look at how violence and your perception of violence changes as you get older, and also learning through unfortunate life experiences the different types of violence or unspeakable things that can happen to women. I think it's something that a lot of women can definitely relate to. That's why I did appreciate that not everything was graphic in this book, but I think if you're a woman or part of a marginalized community, when things happen to you, you don't have to have it spelled out on the page for you to live it or understand it or even have a visual of what happens. Like, you just know, and your body knows, and you just react. Your heart rate goes up, or you cry, or you feel sad or angry. And I thought the way she handled it was so interesting. Her exploration of these violent cycles and how this took place in 1950s Italy. some things just don't change. They may not happen in your front yard, but they still happen behind closed doors. And it's just a really interesting look at that and how sad it is. This type of violence just can't be escaped in some situations. And also how these incidents in the book really shaped their impression of men, or what men should be like, and how women should react or respond, and what they should and shouldn't talk about. Because like I mentioned before, this is very much growing up with the we don't talk about these things, and it's heartbreaking, but still so relevant and accurate. So I just thought it was a brilliant exploration of that. I also thought the protectiveness in this book was just really fascinating. Like, even when Elena and Leela had a little bit of a falling out, or their relationship was a little bit more distant, there were times when something happened to one character and then the other character would jump in and be like, if you touch her again, or if you do X, Y, and Z, I will unalive you, or something like that. And so I love that their bond runs that deep, that even when they're not the closest, they're still there for each other and they're still protective of each other, because ultimately they both want a better life and they both want the best for each other, even though they're in competition. And I just thought it was such an accurate portrayal of friendship. And I keep circling back to that, but it really circles in the novel too. And also the theme of resilience that really kept coming up when I was reading this. It was an image that I used all the time. Whenever I noticed a fracture in her or in me, I knew, perhaps I hoped, that no form could ever contain Leela, and that sooner or later she would break everything again. And so no matter what happens, they always get through it, most of the time together, because they had to, and they wanted a better life. And sometimes their methods were not always the best methods. The end justified the means to them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, I know this is kind of a rambly review, but I finished this I think in like 3 or 4 days, and I read a good chunk of it in one sitting. And it's one that I've thought about it a lot in the days since I finished it. And I know after I stop filming, I'm gonna think of like 5 more things that I wanted to touch on. But this was just so good. It was so good. It's one, again, it's a quiet novel, but it's one that's just gonna marinate and you'll think about it. And I definitely want to read it again. I think 100 pages into this, I went ahead and ordered the other 3 books in the quartet, and I'm very eager to continue on. And I definitely want to read all of her work, but I just really want to explore more of her bibliography. And I just loved the way she wrote. And I loved how this book ended. It kind of ended on a cliffhanger, but not like one where like I need to know what happens next. It's just, I think I know where this is going. But I love that it could go different directions. I did hear somewhere that she intended the quartet to be, I think, like one big novel and then had to break it up for publishing. If I'm wrong, please let me know. But that makes sense why this ended where it did too. So I was not unhappy with the ending. I thought it was pretty realistic, and it was like, oh, I need to read the next one soon because I want to see where this goes. Yeah, so even though this was a hard read at times, I had the loveliest time reading this. And I went to my favorite coffee shop and I had all my my highlighter and my pen and my tabs, and I just spent a couple hours just reading and losing myself in this world and following along with the characters. And I was just able to block out everything around me, and normally that's really hard for me to do in public, but that's how immersive this book was for me. And I see why so many people love it. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was brilliant. And yeah, I would love to talk about it with people, and I just want more people to read it. And like I said, I'm very interested in reading more of her work because I am just incredibly blown away by how lovely this was. So, have you read this book? If so, please let me know down below. If you'd like to leave an emoji, leave a shoe emoji down below. There's a family that has a shoe shop in here that keeps coming to mind, so we'll do that. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.